Breaking news coming out of St James's Park today that Newcastle United have officially confirmed Eddie Howe as their new manager. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Welcome to another video. It is the big breaking news that Newcastle fans have been wanting to hear for a while, that they have finally and officially confirmed the appointment of a new manager, and that manager's new name is Eddie Howe. We're going to be talking all about Eddie Howe. We're going to be talking all about this big breaking news story. But before we go any further, I would like to remind you all to please like the video and also subscribe if you're new. Both things will always and forever be greatly appreciated. But for now, let's go back talking about Eddie Howe, who has been officially confirmed as the new manager of Newcastle United. Yes, it's the news that Newcastle fans have been waiting for. It's the official confirmation of the rumours and reports that have been floating around these past couple of days that Eddie Howe has finally put pen to paper and has officially become their new manager at St James's Park. Of course, there were a lot of names that were being thrown into the ring, so to speak, into the hat, as to who may become the new manager at Newcastle United. Last week, Paulo Fonseca's name was mentioned as being a frontrunner for that vacant managerial role, but talks broke down there. Lucien Favre was also another name to be considered as a favourite, but talks broke down there as well. Unai Emery was seemingly a close contender as well, but I think with the way that Newcastle conducted themselves in their approach for the Spaniard, that kind of broke down after Emery just quickly ruled himself out of contention. But one name stuck around. One name was always lingering in the background when all other names were being mentioned as being forefront or candidates and front runners to the role, and that was of course one Eddie Howe. He was always there in the background, and he's obviously, after a lengthy process, withstood everybody else and has got that job. He is said to have impressed so much in the interview process, although whether that's just talk or not, we don't know. Impressed so much, and was also seemingly ready and prepared again to return to management, back in management again after about a year or so of absence from the game. The 43-year-old has officially become the new manager of Newcastle United, signing on the dotted line a 2.5-year contract at St James's Park, becoming the first manager fully appointed to help build this project at Newcastle in a new era for the Magpies, obviously following their major money takeover, and has become the successor to former manager Steve Bruce, of course, who was again sacked a couple of weeks ago. Right off the bat, immediately, Howe comes into a major task ahead of him. He walks in on a club that are currently sat in the relegation zone in 19th place and are yet to win this season after 4 draws and 6 losses from their opening 10 games. And with upcoming games on the horizon that are going to be major and critical to Newcastle's season potentially, they will face a lot of teams that are either battling for the Premier League title or battling for European football spots, or are fellow relegation candidates and rivals themselves. If the new manager bounce is genuine and actually does exist, then it may not be a bad time for that to actually make itself apparent and go about its work in working for the Magpies in the immediate future. They really do need to get points on the board, I think, is the bottom line here. It's been over a year since Howe was in management. The last time we saw him was in August 2020, where he was with Bournemouth, of course, and via mutual consent left the club following an 8-year reign as manager of the Cherries after their final season in the Premier League resulted in them being relegated. But during that time with the club, he'd obviously spent 8 years there, like I mentioned. He'd obviously helped build them up and guided them to the Premier League, where they spent 5 years there before, of course, their relegation in the final year. Whilst there, he was known for his somewhat progressive and attacking football at times. He was known for his development of youth as well. And he won over a lot of neutral fans as well. Obviously, Bournemouth fans took to him. Of course, he had a history and a long history at that with the club. But neutral fans really took to Bournemouth and really took to Eddie Howe due to his eye-catching football and his man management. And it was often said that he was brought up in conversations as to using Bournemouth as a stepping stone to go on to bigger things within management. He was often talked about as being a future England manager, for example. And I remember at the time of Arsenal going through some uncertain managerial times as well, that he was often brought up in that conversation to be the new manager to Arsenal. So he's definitely well respected in that manner. He definitely got a lot of plaudits and a lot of people on his side, so to speak. But for one reason or another, that never materialised until now, where he's got a massive project on his hands with Newcastle, of course. And I think this was just too big of an opportunity for him to pass up. And honestly, I can't blame him. I would suspect that maybe his time away from the game has helped him, has refreshed his mind, maybe made him learn about things. Maybe he has a time to reflect on his time at Bournemouth and maybe pick up on a few of his weaknesses, or maybe he's just grown a lot in the game from his time being away from the game. I don't know, but maybe going into his new club of Newcastle, maybe he has similar ideas and similar philosophies to what he had at Bournemouth, or maybe they've sort of adapted and maybe they've sort of modified in some way, and maybe he's going in to Newcastle with sort of fresh thoughts, fresh ideas, and maybe a better understanding of the game, and maybe his understanding as a whole has just developed further. I don't know, but it'll be interesting to see if that has occurred. Remember, at 43 years of age, he's still one of the relatively young managers of the Premier League, and obviously has time to continue to develop his managerial status. But from what he's shown at Bournemouth, there were already promising signs there, and I'm sure the Newcastle faithful will want to see those signs continue to develop and maybe carry over into their new club. Regardless, I'd still expect Eddie Howe to try and play a more progressive and attractive and eye-catching level of football going forward. And of course, that's what the Newcastle faithful want. They also want to see their squad play with pride and with passion, to want to wear that famous black and white shirt. And I'm sure Eddie Howe will try to build up and develop that as well going forward. It's just what the fans want to see of any club, really, and I'm sure that Eddie Howe will certainly try and match that sort of bill and criteria. As far as the squad goes, key players that obviously stand out right off the bat are Alain Saint-Maximin and Callum Wilson. The French winger of Newcastle has been arguably their best player this season so far, with his dangerous pace and being a threat to the defence constantly of any team. It'll be interesting to see how his development continues to grow under Eddie Howe. Of course, there's also Callum Wilson, like I mentioned. He's scored 4 goals this season already in the 6 games that he's played. And of course knows Eddie Howe quite well, because these two worked together at Bournemouth. Wilson really made a name for himself in the Premier League under the Eddie Howe regime at Bournemouth. So these two know each other quite well. You've just got to make sure that he's not injury, or the worst of his injuries are behind him and he continues to develop. But these two know each other really well, and I'm sure that he will try and get Wilson firing on all cylinders going forward. Another name who Howe will know pretty well is Ryan Fraser. Again, once upon a time, Ryan Fraser was one of the most dangerous and creative players in the Premier League, and that was under Howe at Bournemouth, and maybe Howe coming in can help him resurrect and recreate that kind of form that he showed there. Matt Ritchie is another name that Howe used to work with. So He's got some players there that he knows, and some players there that he can work with for the immediate future. I'm interested to see how they develop. I'm also interested to see how the development goes of some other players that Newcastle have within their ranks as well. The likes of Miguel Almiron, Joe Willock and Sean Longstaff instantly spring to mind as players that Howe can really get to grips with and modify and mould and hopefully elevate their game, because there are some players within that Newcastle squad that are pretty coachable, and I think that with Howe's help they can definitely raise their game and get to a higher level. So it'll be interesting to see how that all plays out going forward. Look, I know a lot will be made of the Unai Emery element of this story and how Newcastle completely messed up their approach of the Spaniard, and I get it. It's a bit embarrassing for Newcastle or any team that goes from having their A list of targets reject them and then have to go and resort to their B list or whatever it may be. It isn't exactly as embarrassing as the Tottenham situation when they went on to appoint Nuno Espirito Santo, but you kind of get the idea. In saying that though, it's not a bad alternative. Like, yeah, okay, Unai Emery was probably their top of the list. Eddie Howe was probably their second bunch of candidates in the B tier kind of list. I get that, but it's not a bad alternative in my opinion. Howe may not have the resume or the history of an Unai Emery, but in my opinion, he has the more eye-catching football, and more attractive football, and he does have the potential to properly build something here. The Newcastle project is in need of a manager to really build up the youngsters that they have within their academy, and obviously the youngsters that they have currently within their first team squad. I believe that Howe suits that criteria and will do something like that. We saw at Bournemouth that he could do it, and they'll be hoping that obviously he can replicate something like he did at Bournemouth over at Newcastle with that kind of similar aspect and mindset in mind. And I think that he could definitely have a fair crack at doing that. I know that modern day football is full of people with short-term memories, and people will look at his final year in management of Bournemouth and say, well, he's just the guy that went to Bournemouth and got relegated. But there were a lot of aspects to that as to why Bournemouth got relegated. Some on him, some outside of his control. A point that will go against him will be the transfer activity. The transfer activity at Bournemouth towards the end of his time there wasn't the best. There were a lot of money that was spent that wasn't spent very well. And this project with Newcastle, the injection of cash that's going to come in his way, in his direction, you're basically handing this guy a blank checkbook, so to speak. So that might go against him, but I believe there to be a better or a slightly better structure in place at Newcastle than there was at Bournemouth. And I think that with that better structure in place, that's obviously going to continue to grow and develop and get better off the pitch going forward. I think that all parties involved can sort of congregate together, contribute ideas, and it will help in the long run, and they will obviously continue to grow and get better and get to where they want to be. This entire project, like I mentioned, was too big an opportunity for Eddie Howe not to pass up. So it's no surprise he's took it. I think overall though, like that's the whole point. This is the perfect scenario for both parties involved. This is the perfect scenario for Eddie Howe. It's the perfect scenario for Newcastle. For Eddie Howe, he gets back into management. He also has a massive project on his hands, which seems too big of an opportunity to pass up. And he gets to really test himself. This is a massive challenge ahead for Eddie Howe. We'll get to see him obviously back in management, taking on a bigger challenge than what he had at Bournemouth. For Newcastle, they get a manager for 2.5 years, which isn't that long, so they can see how he does and how he develops and so on and so forth before going on to the next level if he does a very good job. They also have a manager with experience of doing a project himself in the form of Bournemouth, rising them through the ranks of English football right the way through to the Premier League. And obviously then they can start to lay the foundation, so to speak, to build their way up and get that project really moving now to where they want to be, and obviously continue that development over time. I think it's the perfect scenario for both Eddie Howe and for Newcastle. For Eddie Howe himself, like I mentioned, he's an upgrade on Steve Bruce and the old regime, there's no doubt about it. He brings with him youth in himself with fresh ideas and fresh thoughts and everything that goes along with that. Eye-catching and attacking football. He's got good history of youth development, which, like I mentioned, is one of the key points in the kind of managerial specification that Newcastle wanted. And of course, Premier League experience. And I think Premier League experience is going to be vital and important going forward, given Newcastle's current situation of being in the relegation zone in a seemingly relegation fight, so to speak. I think that might be a big difference going forward as to who survives and who goes down. And I think that not only that, but if Newcastle can bring in 4 or 5 decent players in January, I know it's difficult with it being the January transfer window, but if they can do that with the money that they have, I think that Eddie Howe, and I may be a bit early for predictions, but I think Eddie Howe can keep Newcastle's heads above water and maintain their Premier League status for at least another season. In my overall opinion though, I don't see this as being a bad managerial appointment at all. I think it's pretty decent, and I'm very, very interested and intrigued by this whole Newcastle project going forward. And even more so now that Eddie Howe is at the helm. But of course, as I always say, these are just the thoughts, comments, opinions, predictions, whatever you want to call it, of this guy. I want to know what you guys think. What do you make of this breaking news story that Eddie Howe has officially become the new manager of Newcastle United? Are you happy with this news, Newcastle fans? Are you unhappy with this news? Would you have liked to see someone else take over that role? Rival fans, neutral fans, whoever. Let me know your thoughts, your comments, opinions, predictions, whatever you want to call it, down below in the comment section, because I'm sure they'll all make for interesting reading on this particular news story. Otherwise, hit that like button on the way. If you enjoyed the video, subscribe if you're new or want to see more content like this. Both things are always and probably greatly appreciated. And as always, thank you all so much for watching and listening. I've been Fletch. This has been another Fletch Talks video, and I will see you all again soon in another video.